US ranchers are shocked to see the biggest decline in cattle production in nearly 60 years. Costs are also skyrocketing, with everything from livestock to supplies to feed and fuels experiencing increases of more than 50%, according to industry experts. Profitability is now in jeopardy, and many operations are becoming unviable due to the enormous losses farmers and ranchers have endured. The outlook for the country's food supply chain has never been worse in recent years. Beef prices are anticipated to skyrocket as inventories continue to decline in the months to come. There's a lot to cover in today's video, but before we do, we kindly ask you to support our work by giving it a thumbs up and remembering to subscribe to our channel. This is an unprecedented crisis that will affect producers, retailers, and consumers alike, and lead to some worrying consequences for our food systems. Beef producers in the US are still thinning their herds in near record numbers, and experts are warning that this will lead to alarming supply problems in the beef industry starting this summer. In the past few years, extreme drought has prompted US ranchers to reduce their herd sizes by sending more cattle to slaughter, explains Desmond Simple, principal economist with Farm Credit. Typically, this would drive cattle prices down. But now, in an environment of inflation and high demand, prices are at record levels. Lee Kraft has stressed that importing feed will not solve the problem on its own. Cattle producers are used to dealing with extreme situations. Unfortunately, when you get multiple years in a row, that's where you start to run out of the feed inventories, and that forces you into more difficult decisions in terms of reducing cattle numbers. Given that this spring is also dry in many regions, in some areas just as bad as 2022 that forced producers to sell, Smythe said, "Right now more than 2/3 of the US cattle herd is in an area affected by drought," according to the US Department of Agriculture. This has led to the largest contraction of the US cattle herd in 60 years. In fact, US producers have contracted their herds 3 years in a row for a variety of reasons. And while this means more beef was being produced in the short term, it meant that supply would eventually go down as herds got smaller and producers sent fewer cattle to slaughter while they were trying to rebuild their herds. Supal has mentioned that although it is normal for production to fluctuate from year to year, this time something is different. In central North Dakota, for example, the 2022 drought reached disastrous levels, wreaking havoc on farmers' ranches and their land. One such rancher was Shane Anderson of Towner, who had been ranching on his family land for nearly 20 years, building his own herd of commercial cattle, only to be forced to scale back his herd. It was a multitude of things, but just knowing in the back of my mind that we had not had any moisture in the spring, I didn't want to get to a place where I was trying to move cattle in the middle of summer, Anderson says of making the decision to sell cattle last year. In an average year, his ranch runs 300 to 350 head. During 2022's drought, he sold over 100 heads. If I didn't think this through, then every decision I made from there on out would probably be a knee-jerk reaction and maybe wouldn't be the best option. Just like Anderson, many had to make tough decisions due to less forage, pastures, and rangeland. I'm definitely noticing an increase in dispersals coming into the bred cow sales this year, exposed Ken and Brant. And say we're dry, we're gonna make cuts early, Brant says. By now, hundreds of ranches have already done a full dispersal of everything over 8 years old. He notes that the same concerns beef producers face in the past couple of years are likely to linger for 2023. The year following a drought year can be tough for forage production and grazing, even with normal precipitation, explains Jerry Volosky, a Nebraska Extension Range and forage specialist. The reasons are most likely associated with the reduced root and rhizome growth, formation of new buds, and overall energy reserve status of grazing plants. In Kansas, Pratt Livestock Assistant Manager Steve Stratford says that everybody is concerned about what will happen this summer. The hay pipeline from northern and eastern regions, where they did have some rainfall last year, has been used up. There are no local supplies left. there's nothing to bring in. Usually at this time, we see pastures greening up, or we have wheat to put them out on, but that is not happening. Stratford revealed that many Pratt County producers were forced to overgraze their pastures through the winter because there wasn't any hay available locally to bring the cows in and feed them. It's bad. It's really bad out there, he describes. You can drive around and just look. There's no pasture coming. We need rain in the worst way. On top of that, the cost of inputs such as minerals, premix, and protein additives, which can extend feed supplies or make poorer quality feed palatable or part of a balanced ration, face price increases of more than 50%, putting them out of reach for the typical local cattle producer. If we don't get rain in the next week or two, you will see the biggest sell-off of beef cattle in the area that has ever happened in history. There are third and fourth generation producers here today wondering how they're gonna make it. They're being forced into selling because there is no feed left. We are in jeopardy. At the same time, local hay producer Jim Berkner said that all kinds of hay are at a premium right now, but there's little for sale and little to find. If you have hay, it is a precious commodity, he outlines. Local cattle producers Rocky and Linda Fox have raised beef southwest of Pratt for decades, and they are considering livestock diversification in light of the difficulties in the cattle industry. No matter what, the cattle have to be fed, Linda Fox said. We will all be standing in bread lines before we give up, but it is getting serious out here. The Director of Public and Governmental Affairs at the Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, Brett Mine, highlighted that it's more than just the hay prices leading people to give up their cows. Equipment costs, diesel fuel supplies, and everything else are going up. The farmers were having a hard time even being able to get some of their fertilizer, let alone afford it. So that's cut into the crop yields for some farmers. The cost barrier is even greater than supplies, Fourline said. We're getting more and more people that are just selling their grass instead of running a cow-calf operation, cow yearling. They're just running livestock for somebody else to help cut their risk. They can't afford to buy back in. From now on, producers will increasingly struggle with profitability amid unpredictable seasons, as climate change makes drought, flooding, and wildfires more common. The experts warned during the 2023 Cattle Industry Convention in New Orleans. Market analysis with Cattle Facts told beef producers that this could be a record price year for all classes of cattle. Economist Kevin Good of Cattle Facts said that in 2022, we had a 13.5% culling rate across the industry, which is the highest ever. Slaughter numbers of both cows and feeder cattle will be shrinking in 2023. And buyers will have to pay up to get what they want. In normal times, when producers reduce their herds and beef production goes up, prices for cattle go down, which in turn can soften prices along the supply chain. But because of inflation and continued high demand for beef, producers are still seeing elevated prices for their cattle, further incentivizing them to reduce their herds, the analyst wrote in a report. It's not pushing down those prices as you'd normally see, they said. That's likely to remain the case and could affect prices along the supply chain all the way to retail, he said. Since producers can only contract their herds so much, eventually they will need to sell fewer cattle and rebuild the herd, which means less production over the next few months. And that usually sends cattle prices higher. If the US faces more droughts in the coming months and years, producers will struggle even more. It would be tough for the sector, that's for sure. The analyst added a warning that you can't lose money for that many years and still be a viable operation. It won't take a lot of time for people not directly tied into cattle production to notice less beef in the grocery stores. There is a shortage coming by the end of the summer. If we don't get any rain, there will be a considerable lack of beef for the consumer. The imbalances between supply and demand are only growing larger. In fact, last year we had the highest per capita US beef consumption in 12 years at 58 pounds. Still, in the face of that supply, we also had record retail beef prices at $7.35 per pound. You can expect to pay way more for beef for the rest of the year and well into 2024. The number of beef cows, which amounts to about a third of all cattle and calves in the US, remains at the smallest count since 1963. This crisis could literally break our food systems and spark shortages that would persist for way longer than anyone could ever imagine. Our food supply chains are already in shambles, and any new disruption has the potential to trigger a cascade of failures that would send not only ranchers, but also retailers and consumers over the edge. This will ultimately affect all of us and effectively transform beef into a luxury item that only a very selected group of people will have access to. Unfortunately, all we can do is hope and pray that the drought eases and more rain comes along. Until then, make sure you stock up on your favorite meats before prices spiral from current levels. Thank you for watching.